So, yes. So let's kick things off. And once again, thank you all for being here. This is our second guest speaker call. And as usual, we are going to distribute popes at the end. So we will provide a link for you to mine the pope and make sure that by the end of the current batch, you all have at least a couple of popes from attending our guest speaker calls. Also, to give some visibility that after this call, we are going to have a Twitter Spaces just to go through some of the thoughts that Justin will share with us here today. So exactly the same thing as we have done last week with Lyle. And so, yeah, that's it. So no more lagging in terms of timing. So Justin, we have here Justin with us. He is the co-founder at Safary Club. Safary Club is a learning community for growth, Web3 growth experts and leaders. And so, Justin, just to start with a couple of bullet points that we have previously discussed. So if you can share more about you, your background, Safary itself, and all of that, yes, that would be awesome and a very cool kickstart.
Definitely. Great to be here, everyone, and thanks for having me on, and Vinci Dao. So my background is in growth, as you might have expected. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was a Middle Eastern Studies major and came back home, and the only thing out here in San Francisco is tech. So I joined a very, very early stage startup as their first employee, which gave me broad exposure to growth and product and marketing and sales. And so I was their everything else guy. It was a marketplace to match engineers with jobs. And then I went and joined another marketplace that was a little bit later stage. I joined as around their 100th employee. This was a marketplace to match warehouse workers with jobs, kind of like Uber for the light industrial sector. And then while I was there, I did both traditional growth marketing on our acquisition team. I did ops-led growth, so building out teams abroad to increase the operational efficiency of our business. And then I also built our first experimentation platform, scaling from 0 to 10 statistically significant experiments per month. And so my journey last summer, I started getting the entrepreneurial itch to start my own company. And I started a HR tech company to help US recruiters source engineers from around the world and hire them. Ultimately invalidated a very key assumption of that business and pivoted into Web3. And so I came to Web3 wanting to build for thinking about what the future of work might be. So I was really obsessed with DAOs in the end of last year. Learned a ton about DAOs and started meeting other community builders like many of you. And so that was my journey is that we launched our first product in December, which was a collaboration tool for DAOs to help them coordinate work. And we learned that it's really, really hard to launch a product in Web3. And there are a few different reasons why I found that to be the case. A major one is that all of the growth tactics that were used in Web 2 aren't available in Web 3 because users are pseudonymous, because communication platforms with those users are very nascent. And a big one is that there are some scammers in Web 3, and so it's really important to build trust with your early users. So if you're completely unknown in the Web3 space, then it's very hard to take a product to market. So our first step was thinking about, how do we establish our reputation at Web3 from the ground up? And for better or for worse, I'd say that most of what people have done in their accomplishments from Web2 don't directly port over to Web3. And that's both a disadvantage for some if you had an awesome career in Web2, but also an advantage for others that you'll see a lot of the top growth leaders and community builders in Web3 today were very nascent in Web2. So, and you can become a great community leader, great growth leader very, very quickly. We see on a lot of job descriptions, it's a bit humorous of we hope that you have like at least 3 months of experience in Web3. Like that's the line in which we're at right now. Is like, quite honestly, most growth leaders and community leaders don't have more than 3 to 6 months of experience in Web3. And with that short amount of time, you can get a really, really awesome role. People are really hungry for people that create amazing content, create amazing communities, and think about how to build and grow Web3 companies, because a lot of the talent within crypto companies to date have been engineers and finance leaders, and not enough non-technical leaders as well. So that sort of brought us to creating what started for me as JKey. I was started as a Web3 content creator. I was part of ScribeDAO and just summarized a lot of the Web3 content that I read. And that really helped me get a grasp on the space, what people were looking for, and ultimately start creating a little bit of an audience in Web3. And through that, I started talking to other Web3 growth leaders and learning about them, sharing stories, figuring out what that looks like in Web3. And that led to the formation of Safary. So Safary is a community of world-class growth experts from Ledger, Dapper Labs, Uniswap, and 200 other Web3 projects. We're the leading community of Web3 growth leaders. And so the way that this started is that I just started DMing people on LinkedIn who are growth leaders and asking them to chat with me about just to share insights and share community and figure out what was needed. And so many of them I found, what's also a big difference for the growth space about Web3 is that there are very, very few people at these crypto companies. That's something that you also notice and don't think too much about is, I'd say they're probably, I don't know, what would be your guess, Bernie, about how many employees full-time you think there are in like Web3 today?
On an average project?
No, like total in the space.
Total. I know that, so I remember like 2 weeks ago, I was going through a couple of charts, and according to some projections, we have currently, I think, something like 15K developers. 15K developers is like Google. So we have one FANG company in the entire Web3 ecosystem right now regarding developers. And when it comes to non-tech, I would assume that we may have 1/3, 1/5 of that, perhaps. So I would say like 5K or 3K even of non-tech people. And yes, yeah.
So I would say the same. I would say the exact same. And that's like a massive opportunity. Like, I think a lot of people from the outside assume that crypto is like that there are tons and tons of people in Web3 because there's just such an outsized influence and amount of money of transactions that are being produced by Web3 companies, even in the bear market today. And so that's a really, really huge opportunity for anyone that's on this call today as well, is to think about, in Web2, you're competing with millions and millions, tens of millions of people for these types of roles, especially now that we're in an era of globalization and more remote work opportunities. But you're competing with 3,000 to 5,000 people that have probably 3 to 6 months of working experience in Web3 today. So
imagine just a job
right
role
time.
like, yeah, imagine like competing with people like an SEO expert or a technical content writer or a community manager on Web2. Like, it is completely nuts. And by the way, let me just challenge you here. So
yeah,
so with the math that we both made, we can almost assume that there are at least like 20,000 to 25,000 people worldwide currently working full-time on Web3. And while it seems like a very small number, at the same time, if we compare the current state of Web3 with the beginning of the internet and Web1 in the 90s, it is like like 2.5K% bigger. Like if 25,000 nowadays is so small in the world, back then we had a few hundreds of people. Like I think like the best story ever is when Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs were pitching the first Mac. They were pitching to a group of hobbyists, and they were like 100 people. And so in Silicon Valley, like the city in the globe called upon the silicon thing, the ship. So what I think is like, okay, there is a small number of people worldwide in Web3 full time, but at least at the same time, we are already enough to keep building this network effect. And that's why I truly believe that Web3, like in 2 to 3 to 5 years, it is impossible that we go back to what we had. We will only move forward. And so what do you think regarding facing these numbers? While they may seem small in a global perspective, what do you think in terms of a very nascent space as Web3?
Yeah, I think that that's exactly right too, is that well, there's no doubt in my mind that Web3 will advance quicker than the early internet days did, because I think people also, while the metaverse and all these sort of like vague topics don't quite make sense to and we're like far off from them, people really understand what the internet means, and that is like, it's a much more easy to envision what a blockchain-based internet means and the different aspects of Web3 than it probably was for people who had never really experienced the internet to think about what that unlocks for them. So I think that it makes sense that we'll see much more rapid adoption in Web3.
Yeah, even more because when we look back at Web2, what I see is that Web3 is being built on top of Web2 scalability. And that scalability is like 4.5 billion people who have already access to the internet. And huge countries that right now are profiting so much in terms of human liberation and freedom, like countries like Nigeria, Vietnam, Argentina, Brazil, huge countries with millions of people who suddenly, for the first time, they don't have to move to Silicon Valley or to the US or to Europe to have the same kind of opportunities. And I think that Web3 is breaking down those barriers in terms of both access through ownership. At least that's how I see things. Yeah, so Almas, I see you have here your hand raised. I don't know, you can either make the question now or you can wait until the end for us to open for a quick Q&A session moment. What do you prefer?
Yeah, I would prefer it right now because again, there are
go
thoughts. So at the moment, we are all bullish and optimistic about what Web3 has got to offer. Definitely, there are a lot of opportunities, but when it meets reality, like when we go, we can say applying for these Web3 startups, communities and stuff, the reality is like kind of a different because on Web2 experience, whatever one has got, we are scaling it to Web3. So in Web2, if you are a community manager or a marketing manager, handled a certain kind of a budget, dealt with, you can say social media, you have a fan following of XYZ number, vanity metrics, then only you can say you'll be considered for a community manager role, or you can say given a chance per se. But if you don't have any other background, it totally depends, you can say, on the founder or the decision maker, whoever you can say taking up that person for that specific role. But most of the time I've seen, you can say, a lot of people don't take chances that very much. When we say Web3 has a lot of opportunities, it is always, you can say, going in that speculation. Yeah, it fills the, you can say, all bill, or you can say it ticks the all marks that we have scheduled for this certain type of role. So what do you say, like how we can say? So it's all every time about skilling, but when do you know like your skilling needs to stop, then you need to work on more on real time thing, and then those like. So we don't have a certain metric, a framework or a standard to, you can say, adhere to. So it totally, the control depends upon, you can say, the recruiter or whoever is, you can say, recruiting for the job. So what do you say, how one can tackle that?
I can take a stab at this one. Definitely agree that, Web3 is still at a transitionary point where we're thinking about, what are the different types of roles. And I think that a lot of them don't necessarily map to what you did before in Web2 either for really any type of role. And I think that what I've seen for the most successful people to get jobs in Web3 have been them starting within communities that are part of those companies and then rising up and getting hired on. So as Bernie was just talking about with Vinci, right? This is an example of there are people in this community that he's gone on to hire as well. So I think that that's like a great way to start, is to get really deeply involved within communities. That's one option. And the other option that I'm sure Bernie will talk more about with you all is really about audience building. Is that I've heard so many times, time and time again, from people who got their job because they're creating awesome content about Web3 on Twitter, and then they just naturally got reached out to by different companies. This was the case for me too. Like, I wasn't looking for a job when I started writing on Twitter with my anonymous account, Jakey. I was literally just going and summarizing articles. So they weren't even my original thoughts. I'd be like, hey, I'm summarizing this article by this person, here it is. And then naturally I started gaining a following through doing that. And I started getting reached out to by people who were like, hey, you're an amazing content writer. Would you like to write content for us? Like, we'll pay you. And so I passed on a lot of those opportunities back to ScribeDAO because I couldn't personally take them on, and very great other writers in ScribeDAO. But I think that that's probably the biggest way that most people have gotten their Web3 jobs. Is it's a great proof point of, one, can you create great content, and two, do people like your content? And so through doing that, I've seen, you guys might have heard of John Wu, who's a rising star at Aztec Network, who's their head of growth. He's amassed like 60,000 followers at this point in time, or last I checked, that most of them he gained in the last few months, just through writing content on DeFi. So I think that there's a great opportunity to build your skills through content writing in Web3. And that's better than any resume that you could possibly have for at least the state of the space today.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and Justin,
noted.
let me just add two things on top of what you said. So the first thing is, let's not forget that like 15 years ago, there was no iOS, there was no Android. Like, people didn't knew how to create apps, for example. And nowadays it is pretty easy to find like engineers who only build Swift apps for iPhone or only work with Android. And most of those people came from, for example, from a Java background. And way before that, we can talk about cloud, and we can talk on premise, we can talk about a bunch of different tech stacks that made us change and adapt. And what I want to say about this is, like, try to also think about your transferable skills, okay? I think that's the first way on how to reframe when you try to come from a Web2 background to Web3. Is like, what are some of my key transferable skills? Because selling, for example, if you come from a sales background, selling in Web2, it won't be that different in terms of human behavior regarding to Web3. Okay, and while marketing may be extremely different, or even community building is extremely different, some core fundamentals are exactly the same. Like, we are talking with people, we are dealing with people, trying to lead people into certain behaviors. And so you can bring all that in terms of transferable skills into Web3. The second bullet point that I really want to refer is just like, I think that also not just joining communities product oriented, but also learning communities, both like Vinci, Safary, and others like Odyssey DAO, Invisible College, and others like these, is a great way to start, because eventually these learning communities, some of them will become like, not necessarily the universities, but like some of them, like us here at Vinci, we are working on soulbound NFTs. And so people will get certificates from completing our courses, which will be constantly evolving, adapting, and improving over time. And so in a couple of months, people will be able to look back and see what you have accomplished already. So using content, just like Justin said, trying to understand your transferable skills, but also finding these learning communities where you can learn and validate your knowledge is a great way for you to also start creating some sort of a CV, a resume on chain. But yes, but Justin, I really wanted to get back to Safary here because I really want to pick your brain in terms of sharing your overall process of how do we, or how have you started to build Safary. So you've mentioned already that you started to DM a couple of folks on Twitter, growth people. Okay, that's a first initiative. But there has been a moment where you had to bring them all under a certain place, to a certain place, under a certain mission, and give them a purpose for them to row together with you. Okay. And despite all the tactical stuff like bots and automations and Discord or not, whatever, let's not dig into that. Let's instead dig into the more abstract stuff, like how to bring people together, how to motivate people, how to stay motivated, for example, when we try to do events and some people don't show up. And how can we also keep motivated as community professionals and community builders? So if you can share some of that.
Definitely. Great questions all around. So yeah, I think that what really united Safary members from the beginning. So we had our first batch was 40. And to be honest, we picked the number 40 because we thought that there was no chance that we'd get more than 50 people to apply to join Safary for our first batch, because we're totally unproven. And what I thought, from talking to these Web3 growth leaders, people were really open to exchanging tactics because they had that Web3 ethos of being a lot more collaborative. So I thought to myself, we need a vision for our community, and what's this vision going to be? And at that point, nobody was really talking about Web3 growth. So the vision that I put together was simple, right? It was let's make Web3 growth collaborative, like it was never able to be in Web2. In Web2, growth is very competitive. You don't share anything with anyone outside of your company. And so it's really started from there of, it started as, Safary is a place where we make Web3 growth collaborative. Okay, like now what does that mean? So then our mission was, well, no one's really talking about Web3 growth. And in Web2, growth is all about creating playbooks, repeatable growth strategies that can be done again and again by other companies. And so we combined these two things together. We said Safary is going to, together, collaboratively, create the first Web3 growth playbooks. And we're going to do that by sharing knowledge in real time. And this is both helpful for those that are sharing knowledge and also those who are getting knowledge to try new strategies, because growth is always very experimental. So I'd say that was the initial impetus that, one, brought people together, and two, motivated them to join. And so we moved from this, I was having these casual chats with, I probably talked to maybe 10 Web3 growth leaders in January from my LinkedIn DM. So not that many people. And when we launched Safary, we had a, clever, wanted to drive FOMO, but in a reasonable way of saying, we're accepting applications and they close in 5 days. And we're accepting a first batch of 40. So not like a 2 months from now, this application process will close. It was like a quick, one and done drop. And I asked those people that I had talked to on LinkedIn to share it on LinkedIn. And so it was really that simple. I talked to 10 of them. I invited them to apply. Some of them were like, known-ish. I mean, like they weren't known by like their names, but they had known companies. And so that was enough to say like, hey, we have the head of growth from Ledger and the head of growth at this other thing. And, we're accepting 40 who wants to join us. And probably like 5 of those people shared on their LinkedIn. So like nothing big. We're not talking like crazy numbers or anything. Talked to 10 people. I and 5 other people shared it on LinkedIn, and we got 200 applications. And it was this like crazy moment. But honestly, even if we'd gotten 50 applications like we anticipated to get, I think that Safary would have had an amazing start that continued. So this is also an early lesson to say, one, key takeaways here are you really need to think about the vision, what is going to unite people, and especially for learning communities like Vinci and Safary, it's about, what do we want this industry to look like? There's this like very big change in how these professions are adapting. And so what do we want the values of people to have in this industry moving forward? And that was like a great, bold vision for the future that we could continue to rely on and continue to resonate with people. And so that was really how we started. We started with this group of 40 and we brought them together into a Discord and we had weekly calls and we matched them together. So there's a couple core feelings that I have about communities that were done wrong about communities that came before us, which happy to get into, or I'll pause there. Bernie, if you want to ask something else about the early days of Safary.
Yeah. Of course, I want to know about the early days at Safary because we here at Vinci, we are also in our early days. So there is a ton that we can also learn from you. But I really wanted, before we jump into that, I really want to make another question first. So it may seem completely absurd, but what we are really talking about here is that there are a bunch of learning communities from which we can identify Safary, now Vinci DAO, if everything goes as we expect, Invisible College, Odyssey DAO, Third Web or Web University, Web3 University, and a bunch of others who are actually defining the future of these jobs and professions. In some way, naturally. It won't be written in stone, but in some way, we are trying to do it. And by helping people to jump to Web3 in the way on how we explain Web3 to them and all of that. So my question is, and before jumping into the early days of Safary, my question is really, how much of a huge responsibility is that? And given that Web3 is about chains and chains are about like the eternity, everything will be on chain, assuming that, for example, here we are working with soulbound NFTs to start working on the first certificate for community professionals. In the first sense, it will be community professionals, but then we believe it will evolve into community managers and community designers and moderators. I don't know. But how do you manage this responsibility with and community building all at the same time while providing the best knowledge at Safary to your community members? So yeah.
Definitely. I think that, what Safary provides is a umbrella, right? Of this is the future for our industry, but Safary and me and myself as a community builder can't deliver on that alone. So I think that that's where you really need to rely on community and think about, how can your community provide value to each other under this umbrella. And that also takes a lot of burden off of the community builder too. So as you're aware, Bernie, one of the things as we became a little bit more mature as a community is that we structure around weekly calls, which are where the community, where we share knowledge about, what the future of growth will look like. And as we've gotten more mature, we've shifted the primary people speaking on those calls to be community members themselves. Versus in the beginning days, it was literally just like me hacking together like all my different insights on Web3 growth. My girlfriend would see me spend insane amounts of hours every Sunday and Monday building out decks and creating all sorts of things to create knowledge on what the future of Web3 growth looked like. But we're very fortunate to now, I'm not the only one who knows about Web3 growth. And there are lots of people within our community who learned those things from me and who are now empowered to and have their own experiences now working full-time in Web3 to be able to share insights as well. And so I think that there is this natural, you as a community builder set a vision for the industry. And over time, you empower your community to be able to take the baton on delivering that vision for the industry. So it's definitely a tremendous responsibility, but I think that it's really about the start and being able to transition both the responsibility, but also the opportunities that come with that to your community over time.
Yeah, great. That's exactly how I have been trying to position myself since the day one. Like, I'm just a facilitator here. I'm not an expert in all things Web3 community building. So I'm here trying to facilitate the discussion and the overall knowledge sharing between everyone. And thank you for that. And so, Justin, getting back to the early beginnings of Safary, but also expanding from there. So tell us a bit about your early beginnings, but then if you can share a bit about your future at Safary, what is next? Like you were saying a couple of minutes ago that you just brought a new CTO on board. So what is your expectation and all of that? Just because as I have been talking to others, so last week, just like on Safary, I have been doing a bunch of one-on-one onboarding calls to also meet everyone and making sure that we are treating everyone as good as possible. And I have been always sharing this idea that here at Vinci, we have two big pillars. On one side, we have the learning community and the learning platform that we are going to ship in less than 1 week. Like next week, we will ship our learning platform. People will be able to go through our courses, materials, and stuff on all the future batches. And that's how we envision a future for Vinci, where more people will be able to join. But on the other side, we have tooling, where, for example, we are currently building an onboarding tool for DAOs and tokenized communities. And that's also where a lot of people that I have been speaking to also want to contribute. Like, okay, Bernie, I really see the pain point of onboarding people as a community professional. And so we have these two sides. And so talking about Safary, how were your early beginnings? Like the strangest thing that happened or something like that? But also if you can share a bit of your future vision.
Definitely. Well, the strangest thing that happened was definitely that first batch getting 200 people to apply. That was a complete shocker to me. And I actually so I had this Notion page that I created for batch one that just laid out the problems that I saw with Web3 growth as an industry and just this very basic vision and mission that I described to you all before. And I haven't updated it in 6 months. And people still go back to people are like, oh my God, I read your Notion page and it resonates so much. So I think that you can also, that's another thing about, community building is really thinking about what is the overall vision that's large enough that you can always tie back to it. And so that sort of grows the community and the exposure. It makes it larger than life. So I'd say quick things on the community building side. The way that we saw communities being run in the early days, for me, early days of my Web3 journey back in December, and note how I say the early days, this was 6 months ago. So now I'm a very experienced professional 6 months in Web3. Yeah. And so you guys will all be very experienced 2 months from now, especially after Bernie's course.
It will be in December, a gift to everyone. You are now experienced, you have 6 months. That's it.
Yeah. And so was that, people were running these very large Discord servers with tens of thousands of people. Nobody knew each other. They're really hard to run, and people weren't getting that much value from them. And so I thought to myself with Safary, well, that doesn't seem to be working. I do believe that communities are really important. Let's just do the complete opposite of what everyone else is doing right now for everything. Everyone has these open communities, which you can join by literally just going from their Twitter to their Discord. I'm going to make it closed. And so I'm going to make a wait list. Everyone's having problems with onboarding and problems with privacy and security. Well, for a closed community, we probably won't have those problems. Everyone has problems with all this moderation. Community managers are constantly looking through all this text within Discord communities. I'm I don't want to deal with that. I'm going to make an audio-based community. We're going to send around community calls, not on text-based communities. So I think that there's, as a community builder too, you can kind of design the community that you want to run. Is that I was like, I don't want to read a bunch of stuff. I want to talk. I don't want to like be constantly sifting through applications for members. I want to like, you know, have onboard everyone at the same time with the same expectations. And so I think that a lot of things that, you know, we spend time on the things that we think are really high value and not on like a lot of the admin. So I designed Safari to be a very low admin community with high impact. And that sounds very obvious to most at the like now to say like, well, of course I'd want a high impact community and not have to do that much work to make it a high impact community. But as the community builder, I think that you save a lot of time and effort by thinking about what are the core activities that really are going to deliver the most value to my community, and how can I do that in the most efficient way possible. And so that is sort of set the basis for a lot of how we structured Safari in the early days that we could still continue to do today. So concretely, a few things are, we think that to have the best onboarding experience possible, like if you join, if the most of the community is on at, you know, what is 2 a.m. your time, and you know, join when everyone else is asleep, and you see like, oh, there's a lot of text, nobody's really here, then you bounce out, that person's gone, they're never coming back to your community. So we thought everyone, the benefit of it being closed is everyone joins at the same time with the same expectations, the same hype. We onboard everyone in cohorts, and so this enables everyone to be engaged and really see the value of the community in real time and who's involved. Second was onboarding calls, which sounds like Bernie's doing with you, which kudos to you. This is definitely a not efficient at all, very time-consuming activity, but I think that it makes the community run well. Is our hypothesis and feeling is that communities are only communities if members know each other personally. Like they've had a one-on-one conversation, not just like they chatted with each other in a Discord thread, like they've actually met each other. And so our thought was, you know, how do we make people in Safari believe that the network is important and valuable? And so our hypothesis, which we've been doing for these batches, is if they have an onboarding call with us and they think that we're cool, me or my co-founder, and then we match them with another person in the community. If they have an onboarding call with us and they think we're cool, they're probably likely to trust that the match with this other community member that they don't know is good. If they do that call and they get value from it, the third, fourth, fifth person, whoever DMs them from the Safari community in the future, they're probably likely to have a call with that person. And that really creates a really, really strong network. And so that builds like early network effects in a community. So you're not just like onboarding people and then them churning and then they can't find value and like this like endless cycle. Is that I always say communities are about who, not about how many. And I think that that really rings true time and time again for us in Safari. Is we've had the opportunity and the blessing now to let in tons more people into Safari, but we've intentionally kept it small. So we have 200 people in our community today, and we've had 1,400 people apply. So we've essentially temporarily waitlisted more than 1,000 people to Safari. But I believe that if we let in 1,000 people to Safari today, we wouldn't be the same community that we are. So there's a balance, right? Communities, I think more and more people think about them as finding your 100 true fans. And it's a lot easier to find your 100 true fans from a community of 200 than it is from a community of 50,000, which is how a lot of different companies have been operating. So that's a little bit about, you know, where we've come and what we're currently working on and how we think about communities a little differently. And what we're doing is we have actually a very similar setup to Vinci DAO. Is we have Safari, which is a learning community, and then we also are building tools for the future. The tools that we're building are around analytics for Web3 companies. And so that's sort of what we're up to as well. And we think that this is a good setup to engage and teach the people who are going to be the leaders of tomorrow, like many of you are. And then also be able to provide them the advanced tooling that they need to really deliver in being the professionals that they need to be for the future. So yeah, I'll stop there and Yeah, back to you, Bernie.
Great. Yeah, and thank you very much. We have here 14 minutes left, so perhaps we can now open for a small Q&A. But I just want to go back to some of the things that you've shared just even before I open the mic to other questions. Uh, that's something very fascinating, because even before I joined Safary, I have been pretty involved. For example, building Indie Hackers a couple of years ago. It was closed at first. Most people have no ideas. I think even nowadays you can only join if you get an invite. I think so. I'm not sure nowadays, but I am one of the early joiners at Indie Hackers. And then so over the last like 9 months, I have been involved in multiple different community or learning communities like Reforge that I know you know, like Sheep 3430 from Dickie Bush and Nicholas Cole. They are for digital writers. Also other courses, cohort courses. And the cool thing that I've always, for example, I don't know if you have ever gone through Sheep 3430 course, but Dicky and Nicholas, they do like more than just the extra mile to pair you with other people on the same time zone as you with the same kind of interests. You have different working groups. They share with you both content that both of them create, but also they bring guest speakers. And so when I started to think about, okay, I really want to start helping more community professionals on how the future may be, how can I structure this? And so initially, VinciDAO was open to the public, and all that crap started to happen. Like 200 people came in just because they were following me on Twitter. Like I don't know if people have any idea, but VinciDAO, there was a time that we had almost like 600 members, but with no mission. Like people just joined our Discord because they were following me regarding my Web3 threads on Twitter. And suddenly, like, no, we have to close these. We have to structure things. We have to come up with some structure. And yes, and so I resonate. I completely agree and resonate with what you said, because some of those issues we have gone through also. And just a final question, Mamen, how do you deal with the people that are left out from each batch? Because right now we also had like 120 applicants for this current batch and just brought in almost 40, so 1/3, almost the same numbers as you. And so our initial criteria was really like people had to be already working on Web3 and with community roles or community related roles. But now for live batch 3 that we are going to start we want to start between August and September, we have already almost 200 applicants. And we don't want to increase that much the size of the batch. And so how do you manage expectations, and how do you deal with people that are left behind or left out? Because we are currently building the learning platform also to give the learning platform. So people will start to funnel in through the learning platform, and batches will become even more premium. But the question is really, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's something that we've thought a lot about, and it's hard to balance when you have a finite number of resources, which you obviously always do. Is I'm essentially, my co-founder is working much more on the tooling side, and our new co-founder as well. So I'm really the only person running the show at Safary as a community builder. So I really doubled down, mostly focusing internally about the community that we have and less so on our external image. Of course, the good thing about creating a really awesome experience internally means that people naturally share through word of mouth the community externally, which is why we've gotten the number of applicants that we've gotten. And so in terms of those that are left out, we send them a nice message and provide them with resources and ways that they can continue their Web3 growth journey externally. And a lot of Safari members have created and written great articles on Web3 growth to get them started, which we share as well. But I think that that's always an interesting question, an important question for how you engage the external audience too. And for us, I personally just don't have the bandwidth yet to be able to really engage a strong audience of Web3 growth leaders beyond the the 200 that are in our community. But my hope is that we will be able to do so in the future, probably through the Safari community members, by having more external Twitter spaces that are public. We actually had a great one last week between myself and Beard on the Block from WWV, and then also with Rachel from Good Ghosting, which had an amazing turnout. There were 300 people that attended, which was shocking to me. Deep in the bear market, literally last week. So yeah, I think that, it's a balance between providing a really awesome experience for people internally, and then also finding ways to be able to provide value for those that are external to your community as well. But personally, I think that, I really hope that the people who aren't able to join Safari or Vinci start their own competing communities. I think that that will be good for the Web3 space overall. And, a big driver for me to start Safari was that I was really interested in joining Seed Club and Protein and a lot of the big communities, exclusive communities that were out there in Web3 when I first joined, and I got rejected from all of them. So I was like, well, dang, what do I do now? I know the communities are big in Web3. I need to be part of these networks. Well, I'm just going to go create my own network. And I hope that people who are on the outside of Safari or inside Safari or in Vinci do the same. Is that, we're still the only community of Web3 growth leaders 6 months out from starting Safari, and that's a shame. So maybe this is an inspiration, Bernie, for me to write in our sorry you weren't accepted for this badge, that we encourage people and hope that they'll build a better Safari than we've built so far.
Yeah, I hope so. So Justin, thank you very much. So everyone in the stage, in the audience now, feel free to just open your mic and make any question that you may have to Justin. We still have here 8 more minutes, 8 to 13, okay? Because we have a Twitter Spaces coming in to share some of your insights.
Aspetta un secondo che sono in una conferenza e sto uscendo. Aspetta.
I think, yeah, Luigi. Okay. Yeah, so if there is anyone who wants to make any question, feel free to open the mic.
Bernie, if there is no one, I would like to ask a question.
Of course, go ahead, Almas.
Right.
Okay, cool. Thanks. So with respect to community building, we go on with onboarding and we can say retention and stuff like that. But what about what's the, we can say, goal, or what's the outcome? Is it in the form of DAO, or is it form of something else? What exactly we are chasing on here? Can you please give me a little bit clearer picture, what's the end thing we are chasing? So it can be only DAO only that we are, you can say, coming up to, or is there any ecosystem that will be changed, or a mature framework apart from DAO that will be looking up to in future?
Okay, Almas, let me just frame your question. So yeah, you are asking me, Bernie, about the vision here for Vinci, if it is for us to become a DAO or just an ecosystem community, or you are making the question to Justin about the future of community building?
Both for Vinci and for Safari, both. We will see, you can say, in future, both of the DAOs shaping up, coming up in any form, or is there any other thing apart from DAO that you guys are looking up to, or you can say a different framework, a mature framework, rather than just being going on the governance aspect or voting aspect of DAO, or you can say what generally a DAO can offer? Is there any you can say disruption on those sides, what the future behold for a community building and stuff? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Justin, I don't know if you want to go first, given that you are the guest here. So go ahead.
Sure, happy to take it. Yeah, for us, I'd say that we originally thought about creating Safari and making it into a DAO, but we ultimately moved away from that because we think that the tokenomics landscape is still not mature enough to build a long-term business around. And so we really think that increasingly we're thinking that tokenomics is something that you layer on after product market fit is achieved. And so communities, it's hard to determine what the product exactly is if you're looking at it from like a tokenomics created into a DAO standpoint. And so there, we have other communities that are around us, like Myosin is a growth marketing DAO, but they're very specific around, they have an agency model, but they're structured as a DAO. So they are actively working on projects, and that is like essentially their product. And so therefore it makes sense to have a tokenomics component to that, of how they reward and incentivize contributors who work on these projects for clients. But for learning communities, I think it's a little different, right? Is that the learning community itself can be sustained by members providing each other value. And that's why I think that there's a lot of the focus that I think about is around matching members together and having them provide each other value. Is that utility is created by members knowing each other and members sharing insights together. And I think that that's fundamentally the basis of community for a learning community like of this kind. And that, you know, financial incentives don't necessarily need to be a part of that. Like, I don't necessarily actually want to get paid for sharing my knowledge with other people in our learning community. And I think that doing so and financially incentivizing people to share their knowledge might warp some of the genuine interactions between those community members. So I think that, you know, creating things into DAOs is good for certain types of communities, but not good for other types of communities. And I think that Scribe DAO, like I mentioned before, and us as a learning community in Safari are two that I think are not ready to like be fully tokenized. But I think that this will also, we'll see as the space matures. As I mentioned, like we're still so early in thinking about like tokens and incentives, and they were deployed one way at a certain point in time, and you know they'll need to be iterated upon in the future to build a long-term business. And so we think about us as, you know, maybe in the same way that Bernie's thinking about is like the tools that we build will sustain our ability to run a learning community. Because running a learning community is obviously very time consuming, but produces a lot of value for its members at a low or free cost. And so that's how we sort of see our model moving forward, is monetize via tools that we create and be able to provide lots of value to the industry and community.
Yeah, and so almost also just to give you some more insight regarding here at Vinci, we also have in our, like on top of our head in terms of overall future and roadmap, we have this thing that we call progressive decentralization, which may happen during the next 18 to 36 months. So as you can see, what I'm basically saying is that, yes, there is a vision where Vinci actually becomes a DAO, and that's why we have been using the Vinci DAO, because that's the ultimate vision for us, but not as other DAOs have done. We don't want to be a DAO since day one, okay? And this is really regarding the experience that I got in the early, like the beginning of this year. So I have been involved in a couple of projects at their early beginnings. So just like Justin, I have been there at Scribe DAO at the early beginning. I have been at Odyssey DAO at the early beginning, and I have been with Invisible College also, like not necessarily involved with, but I have seen how they have structured things also, okay? And we are mostly here talking about not necessarily just learning communities, but mostly about knowledge-driven communities, okay? If not just about the learning or the teaching, but about the knowledge sharing side. But the thing here is that we at Vinci, we really want to make sure that we can both provide scalability through the learning platform, where people will be able to funnel in, start learning, get some badges, and get a certification that will be on chain and a soul-bound NFT, so non-transferable, while at the same time to keep having these closed, prestigious, premium live badges. Okay, so we want to have both and try to build the best of both worlds. And so in order for us to scale the learning platform, what we have thought is over the next 9 to 18 months to release our token, because that will be a way for us to have good incentives for people from our community to also be able to contribute on the content and give some of the classes, okay? And that's a way for pay for people's time that we have come to a conclusion. This isn't written in stone right now. This is just part of our vision in terms of overall roadmap, but this is how we have been thinking about the learning platform. Regarding the batches, only people that have gone through one or two specific courses will be able to apply to these batches, okay, in the near future. But yes, and by the way, I'll be sharing all of these regarding our vision and all of that next Monday on our next community call. And so you will be able to see much more and understand much more about all these different pieces that have to come together in order for us to build something for the long term. And yes, so that's it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks, Bernie. Thanks, Justin. Yeah, answering those
Thanks for
doubts
your
and
question,
clearing
Almas.
those doubts.
Yeah, and friends, let me know if you have any other question. If not, I think we can wrap up here. As I've mentioned, we will have the Twitter Spaces in a couple of minutes. Yes, who is?
Yes.
Yeah, Barnabas. Krishna. Krishna, sorry.
Hey Justin, you said you used to work on weekends also, like building a product like Safary. In a 6 month span, it's a remarkable achievement. What drives you to work on weekends? I want to know
To work on weekends?
Yeah.
Well, I'm a founder, so I am not.
But you will be exhausted sometimes, right? Like, working on every week, every day, like you will be exhausted sometimes. But what made you work on every day?
I mean, I do work to a certain extent most weekends, but I also still have time off. The good thing about being a founder is that my time is quite flexible. So if I want to, go wine tasting on a Thursday afternoon, but still work all Saturday and Sunday, I do. And that's, just the natural thing about being a founder is that you see your time differently than when you're an employee. When you're a salaried employee, you're like, I, want to do a great job at my job, but, that's that. You might work some weekends, you might not. But when you're a founder, the whole company falls onto you and your co-founders to get everything done. And the ever-present challenge of being a founder is there's way too much stuff to do. You're never gonna have time to do it all, and so you kind of have to pick your battles. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna work on Saturday so that I can get more of this stuff done that on this endless list of things that I'm never actually gonna be able to complete. And other times you're like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna do 10% less this week because I want to do something fun with my girlfriend or friends or whatever. So it's it's a negotiation with yourself at all times of what you're going to get done and not going to get done, because there's always too much work to get done. I'm sure some of that resonates with you too, Bernie.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Okay.
Barnabas, I think you had a question. I think we still have a couple of seconds here.
Yeah, good evening, guys. Jim, Justin. Thank you for the wonderful session. All right, I want to ask, I would love to be a part of Safary Club. How do I become a part of Safary Club? Are there any requirements to be a part of Safary Club? All right, those details will be very, very important for me. And also, you talked about some generated content about Web3 marketing from members of Safary Club and you yourself. Where can I find these resources?
Both of those are great questions. I just dropped into the chat our website where you can apply to join. And then I'm also dropping our Twitter, which is a great place to get information. And another place to get great information is this link. The third one is a link to our Web3 Growth Canon, which is a collection of what we think are 30 of the best articles on community building and growth in Web3. So that I'm sure we'll get you started for what you need. So yeah, the growth cannon was a good example too, Bernie, of things that we put together for people that are outside of Safari to get value.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, so Justin, once again, thank you very much for being here and for sharing all that you have learned about community building by building Safari. To all of you, also thank you very much for being here. As usual, I'll make the recording of this guest speaker call immediately available, and I will share with you on our resources hub on our Notion page. And on our Discord as usual. Okay, so, and as usual also, I'm sorry, feel free to DM me, to say anything on Discord, to ask anything that you may have in terms of any questions. You will also find Justin on our community, on our Discord. So if you want to also, just spam him, okay, on all things Web3 growth. So, okay. Friends, have a great day, a great evening, a great whatever you are. Have a great day, and see you in the trenches. Okay.
Have a good one, everyone. Great chatting with you.
Thank you, and thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See you.